Hey there, Benjamin from Lovestarter here. In this tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to get the most out of Google Tag Manager. There's lots to learn, so if you're just getting started, I recommend taking your time. You can hit pause when you need to, and feel free to re-watch any technical sections. If you already have the basics down, then you can also skip ahead using the links I've included in the description. Here's exactly what we're going to cover. Important concepts, including tags, triggers, and variables. How to install Google Tag Manager on your website, adding Google Analytics and Google Ads tags, adding Google Optimize and Facebook tags, previewing and testing your tags, best practices for managing Google Tag Manager, recommended steps to migrate to Google Tag Manager, creating custom triggers to fire tags, capturing e-commerce transactions and using these details in your tags, tracking clicks, buttons, and forms, and using consent mode to fire tags based on people's consent choices. There's lots to learn, so let's start with the basics. What is Google Tag Manager? Well, Google Tag Manager lets you manage all of your marketing and analytics tags in one place. It acts as a layer between your website and the different platforms. It also allows you to streamline the management of the different tags you are using. For example, you might want to add a Google Analytics tag to all of the pages on your website. And then you might decide to add a Google Ads conversion tag and a Facebook event tag to an individual thank you page. You could hard code the Google Analytics tag in your website's template and then add the Google Ads tag and Facebook event tag to the specific page. However, this will quickly become difficult to manage, and it's easy to lose track of where tags have been installed. With Google Tag Manager, we add one piece of code to all of the pages on our website, the container. We then configure Google Tag Manager to fire tags on particular pages or for particular actions. So that's really the key benefit of Google Tag Manager. It lets you centrally manage all of your tags. Now let's cover some important terminology. First, tags. In most cases, a tag is a piece of JavaScript code. They typically collect data and then send it to a particular platform, like a Google Analytics tag, which collects information about the people viewing our website. Or we can also use tags to add additional functionality to our website. For example, we could use the tag to add a social sharing widget to our blog, or we could use the Google Optimize tag to personalize the content people see on our website. Next are triggers. Triggers let you control when a tag should or shouldn't fire on your website. For example, we can use the built-in All Pages trigger to add a tag to every page of our website. And we can also create our own triggers. Maybe we want to track people clicking the announcement banner we have featured at the top of our website. Or maybe we want to fire a specific tag on a thank you page. We can do this by creating and applying triggers to our tags. Then there are variables. Variables are placeholders for information that we can use in Google Tag Manager. For example, we might want to capture details about a link someone clicked on our website. We can then use this information in our tags, triggers, and even other variables. There is a range of built-in variables that let us access information automatically, and we can also create custom variables. And we have our container. A container stores all of the tags, triggers, and variables for your website. Google Tag Manager lets you create different types of containers. You can create web containers to manage tags on your website, iOS and Android containers for your apps, AMP containers for accelerated mobile pages, and server-side containers to manage tags on a server instead of in the browser. We're going to focus on web containers, since they're the most common type of container and they're easy to add to your website. Next is our account. A Google Tag Manager account can store one or more containers. Typically, you will have one account for your organization and then one container in the account. However, you might have multiple containers and even multiple accounts. For example, if you are looking after the tags for two different businesses, then you will have a separate Google Tag Manager account for each business. Now that we've covered these important concepts, let's head to Google Tag Manager. You'll need to navigate to tagmanager.google.com and log in using your Google account. We can see I've already logged in and I have access to a number of existing accounts and containers. If you're getting started for the first time, then you won't see any existing accounts or containers. So let's begin by selecting the option to create an account. We need to name our account. I recommend using the name of your business or organization. I'm going to enter Loves Data as the name of my account. Then we need to select our location and decide if we want to share data anonymously with Google. Then we need to name our container. I'm going to name my container Loves Data Website. Then we need to choose the type of container we want to create. We can see the options we just covered. Let's select Web. And then we need to click Create. We need to agree to the terms of service. And click Yes. We're now given two pieces of code. The first one is the most important. This is the JavaScript container code. And you'll need to add this to all of the pages of your website. This code should be placed inside the head tag on your website, and ideally should be one of the first things in your head tag. The second piece of code is the no-script version of the container. This will load if someone has JavaScript disabled. Since almost all of the tags we use in Google Tag Manager are JavaScript, this won't improve the accuracy of the data we collect. So if you can't add this extra no-script code to your website, it won't have a major impact. Now it's time to add the code to our website. There are different ways you can add the container code depending on how you've created your website. For example, if you're using a hosted platform like Squarespace, you can add the code to all of the pages using an advanced option called Code Injection, which adds any code you like to all of the pages of your website. Or if you're using WordPress, you can add the code to your template or use a plugin to add the code to all of your pages. Okay, let's head to WordPress. Let's select Plugins and then Add New. Now let's search for Google Tag Manager. We're going to use the GTM for WordPress plugin since we will be using this to collect transaction details later in the tutorial. But another good option is to use Google's SiteKit plugin. Let's install the GTM for WordPress plugin. And let's activate the plugin. Now let's click Settings. We need to enter our container ID from Google Tag Manager. So let's head to Google Tag Manager to find this. We can find the Google Tag Manager container ID at the top. It starts with GTM and then a dash. Let's copy this. Now let's head back to WordPress. And let's paste our container ID. And click Save Changes. Now let's select the Integration tab and choose WooCommerce. Let's enable the Track Enhanced e-commerce option and click Save Changes. We've now added the Google Tag Manager container to all of the pages of our WordPress site using the plugin. And since we're using WooCommerce on the site, we will also be ready to start using transaction details in Google Tag Manager. Now let's look at one more example of how to install Google Tag Manager on a website. This time we're going to add Google Tag Manager to a Squarespace site. Let's head to Squarespace. We select Settings, and then Advanced, and then we select Code Injection. Now we can paste the Google Tag Manager container code into the header section, and click Save. We've now added our container to all of the pages of our Squarespace site. If you're using a different website platform, then I recommend searching the support documentation for the platform you're using. This should give you details on how to add the Google Tag Manager container code. I've also included links to additional resources and tutorials in the description below this video. Okay, now that we've added Google Tag Manager to our website, it's time to configure our first tags. Let's head to Google Tag Manager. We're going to start by adding Google Analytics to our website, so let's create a new tag. Let's name the tag GA4 Page View. And let's select Tag Configuration. We're going to start by selecting GA4 Configuration as the tag type. This is for the latest version of Google Analytics, which is Google Analytics 4 or GA4. In this video, we're just going to focus on adding the tags, but if you would like to learn more about GA4, including how to use your reports, then I've included extra resources in the description below this video. Now we need to get our measurement ID, so let's head to Google Analytics. Let's select Admin. We're now in the admin area of a GA4 property. Now let's select Data Streams. And then you need to select the data stream for your website. In most cases, you will have a single data stream, but if you have multiple streams, you'll need to select the one that you want to install using Google Tag Manager. We can see in my property there is only one data stream, so I'm going to select this. You can now copy the measurement ID for your data stream on the top right corner. And now we can head back to Google Tag Manager. Let's paste our measurement ID. And now we need to select a trigger for our tag. We're going to select the All Pages trigger. This will fire our GA4 tag on all of the pages of our website. This will mean we can report on all of the pages people see when they visit our website. Now let's save the tag. We've now added our Google Analytics tag to our container. The next step is to preview and test our tag. And then when we're ready, we can publish the changes we've made to our website. I do want to point out that if you already have the Google Analytics tag on your website, you will want to remove this at the same time you publish your changes. Otherwise, you'll have the tag from Google Tag Manager and your existing Google Analytics tag on your website. So two identical tags, which isn't good. We're also going to talk about migrating to Google Tag Manager in more detail later in this tutorial, so I recommend you keep watching before you publish your tags. But if you are in a hurry, you can also skip ahead using the links in the description below. Before we preview and publish our container, we're going to add some more tags to Google Tag Manager. Let's start by adding a Google Ads remarketing tag to our website. Let's head to Google Ads. To set up our Google Ads remarketing tag, we select Tools and Settings, and then Audience Manager. We can see in my demo account that I haven't created any audience lists yet, so we can set up a new audience to create our remarketing tag. If you would like to use an existing tag, then just select Your Data Sources on the left, and then look for Google Ads tag. If you've already created a tag, then you will be able to view the details for your current tag and find details to reinstall the tag. Since we're getting started for the first time, let's select the option to set up the Google Ads tag. We're going to select the option that allows us to create an audience list for people that have been to our website. Then we just need to follow the steps. And we're given our Google Ads tag. We can then select the option to add the tag using Google Tag Manager. And we need to copy the conversion ID. Now we can head to Google Tag Manager. We need to create a new tag. And let's name the tag Google Ads Remarketing. Now let's select Tag Configuration and choose Google Ads Remarketing as the tag type. Now we just need to paste our conversion ID into the tag configuration. And now we need to add a trigger to our tag. Let's select all pages as our trigger. This will add the Google Ads remarketing tag to all of the pages on our website. We can now save the tag. Okay, now to improve the accuracy of our Google Ads tags, including our remarketing and conversion tags, we need to add another tag. This is the conversion linker tag. This tag can help improve the accuracy of our Google Ads tag because it stores information as a first-party cookie for our website. So let's create another tag. Let's name the tag Conversion Linker. Now let's select Tag Configuration and choose Conversion Linker as the tag type. We're going to leave all of the default settings and we're going to add a trigger to our tag. Let's select all pages again. And let's save the tag. We've now added a Google Ads remarketing tag and the Google Ads conversion linker tag to our container. Now we're going to add Google Optimize to our website using Google Tag Manager. Google Optimize allows you to run experiments on your website to increase conversions and engagement. And you can also use it to present personalized content to your visitors. We're going to add the tag in a moment, but if you'd like to learn more about Google Optimize, including how to get started and how to create an experiment, then I've included a link to my tutorial in the description below this video. Okay, let's head to Google Optimize. To implement Google Optimize using Google Tag Manager, we'll need our Optimize container ID. Here we can see I've already opened my Optimize account, so we just need to select Settings. And then we can copy our container ID on the top right corner. Now let's head to Google Tag Manager. And let's create a new tag. Let's name the tag Google Optimize. And let's select Tag Configuration. And let's choose Google Optimize as the tag type. We paste our Optimize container ID into our tag configuration. Now let's select Advanced Settings. And under Tag Firing Options, we need to ensure Once Per Page is selected. Now we need to save the tag without any triggers, so let's click Save. And then Save Tag. Next, we need to modify our GA4 configuration tag. You'll need to ensure that the GA4 configuration tag is for the same measurement ID that has been linked to your Google Optimize container. Let's open the GA4 configuration tag. Let's select Tag Configuration, then Advanced Settings, and Tag Sequencing. Now we need to enable the option to fire a tag before our Google Analytics tag fires. And we need to select the Google Optimize tag we just created. And let's save the tag. Okay, now since we're using Google Tag Manager to implement Optimize, it's a good idea to add the optional anti-flicker snippet to our website. Google Tag Manager loads asynchronously, which can cause your content to flicker as it loads and changes are applied from Google Optimize. I've included a link to the anti-flicker snippet in the description below this video. Let's take a look at my website to see this. Here we can see the code that is added to all of the pages of my site. We can see the Google Tag Manager container. And above this is the anti-flicker snippet. When you add this snippet, it needs to be just before the Google Tag Manager code, and you'll need to make sure your Google Tag Manager container ID is included in the code. Again, I've included extra details about the anti-flicker snippet in the description below this video. Now it's time to add the Facebook pixel to our website using Google Tag Manager. Let's head to Facebook. I've already opened the Meta Business Suite for my page. And now we need to open the Events Manager. So let's select All Tools. And now let's choose Events Manager. I've already created a pixel for my website, but we can see it hasn't collected any data yet. So I'll need to add the pixel to my website. If you're getting started for the first time and you don't have an existing pixel, then you can select the option to connect a new data source. And then select Web. Since I already have a pixel, I'm going to close this. And let's select Data Sources to view our existing pixel. If your pixel has already been set up, then you'll see existing events listed here. And you'll also have the option to create a new event. We can see my pixel hasn't been set up yet, so let's select Continue Pixel Setup. Now let's choose the option to manually add the pixel code. We're now given the pixel base code to add to our website, so let's copy this code. And let's head to Google Tag Manager. Now we need to create a new tag. I'm going to name the tag Facebook Pixel, but you can also name it Metapixel or something similar. Now let's select Tag Configuration. And let's choose Custom HTML as the tag type. Now we can paste the base code from Facebook. And let's select Advanced. And under Tag Firing options, let's change once per event to once per page. This will mean that the Facebook pixel isn't fired multiple times as someone is browsing a page on our website. Now let's select Triggering. And we're going to select the All Pages trigger. This will mean that our Facebook pixel is added to all of the pages of our website. Now let's save our tag. We've now added the Facebook pixel. Since we've added a number of tags to our container, the next step is to preview and test those tags before they're published. Testing the tags, triggers, and variables you've added to your container helps to ensure that they're sending the correct information to the different platforms you're using. Let's select Overview to view a summary of the changes we've made to our container. Under Workspace Changes, we can see all of the tags, variables, and triggers we've added. We can see our GA4 tag, our Google Ads tags, and so on. And if we look at the card on the top right, we can see it says that our container hasn't been published yet. This means that we've created the tags, but they're not currently published on our live website. To test our tags, let's click Preview. A new tab opens for Tag Assistant. And we need to enter a URL on our website. You will need to ensure that you've added the Google Tag Manager container code to all of the pages on your site as we covered previously. Another tab opens with the URL we entered. We can see that the debugger has connected and we can navigate to another page. And now let's open Tag Assistant. On the left-hand side, you'll see the pages that have loaded while using the preview mode. We can see both of the pages we viewed. We can also see the triggers associated with the pages. This includes built-in triggers, like when the Google Tag Manager container loads on the page, as well as any other triggers you've configured. For example, if we select Container Loaded, then we can see the tags that fired for the page, and tags that weren't fired. We can select a tag to then see more details. Let's select the Google Analytics tag. We can see the details for the tag. And below this, we can see the trigger conditions that allowed the tag to fire. And below this, we can see any exception triggers that might prevent the tag from firing. Let's close the tag. Apart from viewing the tags, we can also select the Variables tab to see the information that's available to use in Google Tag Manager. And the Data Layer tab lets you view the information in the data layer. Since we've added a GA4 tag to our website, Tag Assistant will automatically identify this, and you can select the measurement ID for your GA4 property at the top. This lets you view the information that has been sent to your GA4 property. For example, we can select the first page we viewed. And this lets us see the different hits that were sent to our GA4 property. And we can then switch back to our Google Tag Manager container ID. Apart from the GA4 tag, we can also see all of our other tags have fired. We can see the Google Optimize tag, the Google Ads Remarketing tag, the conversion linker tag, and the Facebook pixel. All of these tags use the all pages trigger, which means they should fire on every page of our website. Since these tags are all firing, we can see they're working correctly. And here's my recommended workflow for Google Tag Manager. I recommend following these steps for any changes that you want to make to your container, whether it's adding a new tag or even changing an existing tag. The first thing is to add or change the tags to the container. This might also include updating or adding triggers and variables. Then it's time to preview the tags, triggers, and variables you've added. Make sure you navigate to any relevant pages and perform any actions you're aiming to track on your website using the preview mode. As we've seen, this allows you to check exactly what happens. You can see the information that is going to be sent and check that everything is working as expected. If you encounter any issues, you can diagnose those issues while using the preview mode. You can also share the preview if needed. You can then check the draft to make sure that any changes that have been applied in the draft are correct before publishing. You can also check the change history in case anyone else might have been in Google Tag Manager since you started making these changes, to make sure none of their changes are also going to be published when you publish. Now we're going to cover migration. The steps you'll need to take to migrate your implementation to Google Tag Manager will depend on the tags you currently have on your website. For example, if you're only using the Google Analytics tag and haven't made any customizations, then migration will be fairly straightforward. However, if you've modified the tag and have other tags on your website, then you'll need to take time planning your migration. Let's walk through some of the different scenarios you might encounter. The simplest scenario is if you're just getting started. For example, if you're launching an entirely new website and don't have an existing Google Analytics property. In this case, you can set everything up from scratch in Google Tag Manager. You will create your property, get your measurement ID from Google Analytics, and configure your tags in Google Tag Manager. Then there is the scenario of just having the standard Google Analytics tag added to your website. You might be using a plugin, or maybe you've added the gtag.js tag to your website, but you're just using the standard tag and you haven't made any customizations to your tracking. In this case, you can add the Google Tag Manager code in parallel to the existing tag. Replicate the tag in Google Tag Manager, then publish your container and remove the existing tag. The next scenario is if you're using a modified Google Analytics tag or you've implemented customizations. For example, if you've added the gtag.js tag to your website and you've configured ecommerce tracking. In this case, you'll need to replicate the Google Analytics tag in Google Tag Manager, and you'll also need to ensure Google Tag Manager is configured to capture your e-commerce transaction details and pass them to Google Analytics. And continuing this scenario, you might have implemented additional customizations, like custom events, user properties, or custom parameters for GA4. You will need to take extra time to ensure that these customizations are implemented using Google Tag Manager before you remove any existing tags from your website. And apart from Google Analytics, you'll also need to look for any other tags and any other third-party code you've added to your website. In most cases, these can also be migrated to Google Tag Manager. Okay, now let's run through my migration checklist. Depending on the current tags that have been added to your website, you can customize this checklist. And if you'd like to download a copy of my Google Tag Manager guide that includes this checklist, you can find a link to get the guide in the description below this video. Step 1 is to create a list of your existing tags. This should include your Google Analytics tags and any other tags you've added to your website. It's also a good idea to make a note of how the tags are added to your website. For example, you might be using a plugin to add the Google Analytics tag to your website, or maybe you've added the Facebook pixel by pasting it into your website's template. Step 2 is to create a list of any tracking customizations you've made. For example, you might have implemented e-commerce tracking to record the items people purchase on your website. Or if you're using universal analytics, you might have added event tracking to report how many people are downloading a particular PDF on your website. Step 3 is to document your current implementation. It can be helpful to create a spreadsheet that contains all of the tags and customizations. This spreadsheet documents the different tags currently used on a website, so you can then have a full view of all of the elements you need to implement in Google Tag Manager. Creating a spreadsheet like this is optional, but it's definitely useful if you have multiple tags and customizations you need to migrate to your container. Step 4 is to add the Google Tag Manager container code to all of the pages of your website. The way you add the container code will depend on the website platform you're using. For example, if you're using WordPress, then you might use a plugin to add the code to all of the pages. Or if you're using Squarespace, you'll use the code injection option to add the code. Step 5 is optional. It's to work with your web developer to add a custom data layer to your website. A custom data layer makes information available to Google Tag Manager. For example, if you're using an e-commerce platform that doesn't provide a Google Tag Manager integration, then you'll want to implement a custom data layer that includes transaction details. This means that when a transaction occurs, you can pass all of the transaction details to Google Analytics, Google Ads, Facebook, and any other tags where you want to send e-commerce data. Step 6 is to check that variables have been enabled or created for any information you want to use in your tags and triggers. For example, if you want to track people clicking on a particular website promotion, you might need to enable the click class or click ID variable, so you can make use of the class or ID of the element someone clicks on your website. Step 7 is to create all of your tags in Google Tag Manager. This is where you take all of your notes from steps 1, 2, and 3 and add all of the tags you're using to your container. Step 8 is to apply appropriate triggers to your tags. For example, when you add the default page view tags for Google Analytics, you can use the built-in All Pages trigger. This will mean that the tag is added to every page of your website. Then for any tags that need to fire on individual pages or for specific actions, you'll need to create custom triggers in Google Tag Manager. Triggers can be created based on a whole range of actions, from the page someone is viewing, to the element they click, to watching an embedded YouTube video. There's a whole range of triggers. Step 9 is to test all of your tags using the preview mode. We covered Tag Assistant and the preview mode earlier in the tutorial. Finally, step 10. Once you're happy with the tags and triggers and variables you've added to Google Tag Manager, it's time to publish the container. The important thing to remember is that when you publish your container, you should remove any tags that are still hard-coded on your website. For example, if you've added the Google Tag Manager container code to your website and you have the Google Analytics tag on your website, then when you publish the container, you should remove the Google Analytics tag. This is because you'll now have the tag in Google Tag Manager and you don't want it to be duplicated on your website. So they're the steps you'll need to follow to migrate to Google Tag Manager. Then whenever you need to add a new tag or modify an existing tag, you can make the changes in Google Tag Manager without having to change the code on your website. And when you do make changes, don't forget to preview and test your changes before they're published. Okay, let's head back to Google Tag Manager. Now that we've covered how to preview and test our tags, and we've covered steps for migrating to Google Tag Manager, it's time to publish our container to our live website. This means all of the tags we've created will begin to send data to Google Analytics, Google Ads, and the other platforms we're using. So make sure you've followed the migration steps if these tags have already been added to your website. When you're ready, it's time to click Submit. We can then name the version. This is a short, top-level description of the changes you've made to the container. Entering a version name is helpful because if you ever need to roll back to a previous version of your container, the name you enter will make it easier to understand what's included in the container. I'm going to enter added GA4 ads optimized and Facebook as the version name. You can also enter a description to add additional information about the changes you've made. When you're happy, click Publish. This means the changes we've made to our container, including any changes to tags, triggers, and variables, will now be on our live website. So now as people browse our website, the tags we've added will be sending information to the different tags we added. Now that we've published our first set of tags to our live website, we're going to cover how to set up Google Ads conversion tracking and how to track a custom conversion into GA4, Google Analytics 4. Let's start by adding a Google Ads conversion tracking tag that only fires on a specific thank you page. To do this, we're going to create the tag in Google Ads, then we'll need to create a new tag and trigger in Google Tag Manager. Let's head to Google Ads. To create a new conversion, we select Tools and Settings, and then Conversions. You'll see any existing conversions listed here. Let's click New Conversion Action. There are different options for configuring conversions in Google Ads. We're going to create a website conversion in Google Ads, but if you would like to learn more about the different types of conversions you can configure in Google Ads, then you can find extra resources in the description below this video. Okay, let's select Website. We can then enter the domain for our website. And click Scan. Since we're going to be using Google Tag Manager to fire our conversion tag, we're going to manually configure our tag. Let's scroll to the bottom and select Add a Conversion Action manually. Let's select Submit Lead Form as the goal category. I'm going to leave the default name for the conversion, but you can change this to anything you like. Now let's select Use the same value for each conversion. And I'm going to enter 10 as the value. This will mean that every conversion is worth $10. Now let's select 1 as the count. This will mean that if people enter their details multiple times, we'll only count 1 conversion in Google Ads. Let's leave the rest of the defaults for this conversion and scroll down. Let's click Done. Now let's click Save and Continue. We're now given the instructions for adding the tag to our website. Let's select the Tag Manager tab. And we need to copy 2 things. We need to copy the conversion ID, and we need to copy the conversion label. You'll find this under the name you chose for the conversion. Let's click Done. Now let's head to Google Tag Manager. And let's add a new tag. Let's name the tag Google Ads Conversion and Lead. Let's select Tag Configuration and choose Google Ads Conversion Tracking as the tag type. Now we're going to paste the conversion ID and the conversion label we copied from Google Ads. Next, we need to add a trigger to our tag. Let's select Triggering. And since we only want to fire this tag on a specific page on our website, we're going to create a custom trigger. To do this, we click the plus sign on the top right corner. Let's name our trigger Thank You Page. And let's select Trigger Configuration. And we're going to choose Page View. By default, we can see that the All Page Views option is selected, but we only want this trigger to fire our tag on a specific page. So let's change this to Some Page Views. And we're going to select Page Path from the drop-down. This lets us use everything after our website's domain for our matching condition. For this example, I'm going to leave the matching as contains, but you can choose from a range of options, including starts with, ends with, and regular expression matching. If you'd like to learn more about regular expressions, I've included a link in the description below this video. Now we need to enter what we want to match. I'm going to enter /thank-you, which will mean we match any pages on our website that contain this thank you page. Now I'm going to save the trigger. This means our Google Ads conversion tag will only fire on our thank you page. Let's save the tag. We've now added a Google Ads conversion tag that will only fire when people view the thank you page on our website. Now that we've added a Google Ads conversion tracking tag to our Google Tag Manager container, let's use the same trigger to send a custom event to Google Analytics 4, GA4. Let's head back to Google Tag Manager. And let's create a new tag. Let's name the tag GA4 Generate Lead. And let's select Tag Configuration. We're going to choose GA4 Event as the tag type. And using the drop-down, we need to select our existing GA4 configuration tag. Now we need to name our event. Google provides a list of recommended event names to use, so for this example, I'm going to enter generate_lead. You can enter any event name you like, including any of Google's other recommended events or your own custom event name. You can also pass additional information with the event using parameters and user properties, but I'm going to leave these options. So let's add a trigger to our tag. Let's select the custom trigger we created for our thank you page. This means our GA4 event tag will fire on our thank you page and we'll be able to configure the event as a conversion in Google Analytics. Now let's save the tag. We now have a GA4 event tag that will fire when people view our thank you page. Now we're going to cover how to capture details from e-commerce transactions and use these details in our tags. We're going to use WooCommerce on WordPress for this tutorial, but you can get up and running if you're using another platform, like Shopify. I've included links to additional resources and tutorials in the description below this video. Since we installed the GTM for WordPress plugin earlier in this tutorial and enabled the e-commerce tracking option for WooCommerce, we just need to configure things in our Google Tag Manager container. I have a pre-configured template I'm going to use to capture e-commerce details, so I'm going to import this into our container. You can get a link to this pre-configured template in the description below this video. Okay, let's select Admin. Then Import Container. And now let's choose the pre-configured container. I'm going to choose Existing to use my current workspace. And then I'm going to choose Default. And I'm going to select Merge to keep the other tags, variables, and triggers that are already in Google Tag Manager. Now I'm going to click Confirm. We've now imported a new tag, trigger, and variable to send e-commerce details to Google Analytics. All we need to do is configure the new tag. Let's navigate to Tags and select the new GA4 e-commerce tag. Now we just need to select Tag Configuration, choose our existing GA4 configuration tag, and save the tag. This will now mean that we can report on e-commerce purchases and other actions in Google Analytics. Now we're going to add another Google Ads conversion tag to our website. We're going to create a conversion tag to track purchases, and we're going to reuse some of the e-commerce details that we're also sending to Google Analytics. Let's head to Google Ads. We select Tools and Settings, and then Conversions. Let's create a new conversion. And let's select Website. We can then enter the domain of our website. And click Scan. Now let's scroll to the bottom and select Add a conversion action manually. We're going to trigger this conversion when a purchase occurs on our website, so let's select Purchase as the goal category. I'm going to leave the default name for the conversion, but you can change this to anything you like. Now let's select Use different values for each conversion. And let's enter 0 as the default value. This will mean that if we don't send a value to Google Ads, then 0 will be reported. If you would prefer to assign a default value, then you can do this for your conversion. And since this conversion will be used to track purchases, let's leave every selected as the count. If you're tracking leads or other actions that you only want people to complete once, then you can change this to 1 for your conversion. I'm going to leave the rest of the defaults for this conversion, so let's scroll to the bottom and click Done. Now let's click Save and Continue. We're now given the instructions for adding the tag to our website. Let's select the Tag Manager tab. And we need to copy 2 things. We need to copy the conversion ID and we need to copy the conversion label. You'll find this under the name you chose for the conversion. Let's click Done. Now let's head to Google Tag Manager. And let's add a new tag. Let's name the tag Google Ads Conversion and Purchase. And let's select Tag Configuration. And choose Google Ads Conversion Tracking as the tag type. Now we're going to paste the conversion ID and the conversion label we copied from Google Ads. Since we're configuring a conversion for purchases on our website, we're going to pass some additional information to the conversion tag. For the conversion value, we're going to add our ecommerce value variable. This will automatically pass the total value of the purchase to Google Ads. We can also add the ecommerce transaction ID variable. And we can add the ecommerce currency variable. Now we need to add a trigger to our tag. Let's select Triggering. And we're going to create a new trigger that only fires when a purchase is made. To do this, let's click the plus sign on the top right corner. Let's name the trigger GA4 Purchase. And let's choose Custom Event as the trigger type. Now we enter Purchase as the name. This will mean the trigger will fire when a purchase event is sent to the Google Tag Manager data layer. Now let's save the trigger. And save the tag. We've now configured a Google Ads conversion tag in Google Tag Manager. Once you've added your new tags and triggers, it's time to preview and test your changes. Since we've already covered the steps to preview and test our tags, I'm going to skip this step. But if you haven't watched that section, you can find a link to it in the description below this video. When you're happy with your changes, it's time to publish your container. To do this, we click Submit. And then we name the version of the container we're publishing. This should be something short and descriptive. You can also add a description to document your changes in more detail. When you're done, click Publish. The new tags have now been added to our live website. We've now covered how to add additional tags that are triggered for particular actions and pages on our website. Next, we're going to walk through how we can track clicks, buttons, and forms using Google Tag Manager. We'll create triggers to send data to Google Analytics, but you can also apply the same techniques to fire other tags, like a Facebook event. Let's start by heading to my website. We're going to look at how we can track people clicking on particular elements on our website. So the first thing you need to do is identify the element you want to track. At the top of my website, we can see there is an announcement bar. So let's look at how to track people clicking on this. So let's right-click the announcement bar. And let's select Inspect. We can see there is a link, and the link has a class of SQS-announcement-bar-URL. So we're going to use this class to configure a trigger in Google Tag Manager. Now that we've identified the element we want to track, let's head to Google Tag Manager. And let's create a new tag. Let's name the tag GA4 Announcement Click. For this example, I'm going to create a GA4 event tag, but you can use the same approach to trigger any other tag you like. Let's choose Tag Configuration and select GA4 Event as the tag type. We need to select our existing GA4 configuration tag. And now let's name the event, select _announcement. And let's select event parameters. And add a row. Let's enter announcement_ID. And let's select the variable icon on the right. Now let's choose the built-in variable option on the top right corner. And let's enable the click class variable. This will mean that the value of the class people click will automatically be passed to Google Analytics. Remembering back to the demo site, this will be sqs-announcement-bar-URL for clicks on the announcement bar. Now let's add another row. Let's enter location_ID. Let's select the variable icon again, and the built-in option on the top right corner. This time let's enable the click URL variable. This will automatically pass the link that is used in the announcement bar to Google Analytics. So we'll be able to report on the number of clicks along with the URL and class of the element. Next we need to add a trigger to the tag, so let's select Triggering. And let's click the plus sign to create a new trigger. Let's name the trigger Announcement Click. And let's select Trigger Configuration. Since the announcement bar is a link, we're going to use just links. But if you wanted to track people clicking on other types of elements, then you could consider using the All Elements trigger. Now let's select Some Link Clicks. And let's ensure Click Class is selected. Now we can select equals and enter sqs-announcement-bar-URL to match clicks on the announcement bar link. Now let's save the trigger and the tag. We can now preview our changes. And open the demo site. We can then click on the announcement bar and head to the Tag Assistant tab. We can now see our tag has fired, and we're sending an event to Google Analytics every time someone clicks our announcement bar. Now that we've covered how to track clicks on website elements like promotions, let's look at how we can fire a tag when someone clicks on a website button. Let's head back to my website to take a look. Here we can see a button on my demo site. When we click the button, a form opens. Let's close the form. And let's right-click on the button and choose Inspect. We can see the button. We're going to use the sqs-editable-button class to configure our trigger. So let's head back to Google Tag Manager. And let's create a new tag. Let's name the tag GA4 button click. And let's select Tag Configuration. Now let's choose GA4 Event as the tag type. We need to select our GA4 configuration tag. And let's name the event select_content. And just to flag, you're free to use any of the other recommended event names or even create your own event name. Now let's select event parameters and add a row. Let's enter content_type as the name and button as the value. Now let's add another row. Let's enter item_ID as the name, and let's click the variable icon for the value. Let's select the built-in option on the top right corner, and let's enable Click Text. This will let us capture the button text and send it to Google Analytics. An alternate option is to simply manually enter the value you would like to see in your reports, like we did for the content type parameter. Now let's add a trigger to our tag. Let's create a new trigger. And let's name the trigger Form Button Click. And let's select all elements as the trigger type. Now let's choose Some Clicks. And choose Click Class. Then Contains. And enter SQS-editable-button. We can now save our trigger and our tag. Now let's preview our changes. And open the demo site. We can then click on the button and head to the Tag Assistant tab. Great, we can see our tag has fired. Okay, now that we've covered tracking clicks and buttons, let's look at how we can track forms. Let's head back to my website one more time. Here we can see a form that captures people's email address. Now, the way you configure a trigger for form submissions will depend on a number of factors. This will include the way your website has been developed. For example, the platform you're using. My website is using Squarespace, and it will come down to how the form functions on your website. There might be times when you have a standard form where you can configure your tag to fire based on the form's class, and there might be times the form uses Ajax to dynamically capture details and pass them back a confirmation message. Okay, let's right-click and select Inspect. We can see the form, and we can see it has a class of newsletter-form. Since I'm using Squarespace, I won't be able to simply use this class. However, if you're not using Squarespace, then this is a good starting point. So for my Squarespace example, let's submit the form. We can see a thank you message appears on the same page, so we haven't been redirected to a dedicated thank you page. Let's right-click on the thank you message and select Inspect. We can see the thank you message is contained in a div with a class of form-submission-text. So I'm going to use this to configure my trigger, but remember you might be able to simply use the forms class. Okay, let's head to Google Tag Manager. Let's create a new tag. And let's name the tag GA4 Newsletter Form. Let's select Tag Configuration and choose GA4 Event as the tag type. Let's select our GA4 configuration tag. And let's name our event sign_up. Let's select parameters and enter sign_up_type as the name. And here's a quick tip. Instead of selecting the variable icon like we did for clicks and buttons, let's simply type in 2 opening curly braces and select Choose Built-in Variable from the drop-down. This is a quicker way to add variables. Now let's enable the form class's variable. This will now mean that our sign-up type is set to the class of the form. Now let's add a trigger to our tag. Let's create a new trigger. Let's name the trigger Newsletter Form. And let's select Element Visibility as the trigger type. What I'm going to do is trigger my tag when the thank you message is visible after someone has successfully submitted the form. So let's select CSS Selector and then enter .form-submission-text. This will mean the tag fires when the div with the class of form-submission-text is visible. Now let's save our trigger and our tag. And let's preview our changes. Let's open the demo site. And let's complete the form. And let's head to the Tag Assistant tab. We can see that our tag has fired. We can now report how many people submit the form in Google Analytics. So that's how you can use Google Tag Manager to fire tags for clicks, buttons, and forms on your website. And remember that we use the triggers we created to fire our Google Analytics tags. We can use the same technique for any other tags you want to fire on your website. Before we wrap up this tutorial, I want to show you a simple solution for using consent mode in Google Tag Manager. Consent mode lets you adjust how tags fire based on people's consent choices on your website. For example, if you're using a consent management platform that lets people choose if they want to use cookies on your website, then you can integrate your cookie banner with Google Tag Manager using consent mode. When people come to your website, you can then choose to only fire tags when people consent to cookies. Let's head to Google Tag Manager to take a look. We're going to start by adding the consent overview to our container. This option provides a summary of tags that do and don't use consent mode. To enable this, let's select Admin, then Container Settings. Let's enable the Consent Overview option and click Save. Now let's navigate to Tags. We can now see the consent icon above our tags. Let's select this. This shows us all of the tags in our container. We can see all of our tags are listed under Consent Not Configured. This tells us that we haven't configured consent mode for our tags yet. At the bottom, you'll also find a section called Consent Configured. When consent mode is defined for a tag, they'll be listed in this section. Let's close the overview. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you a simple solution for using consent mode. We're going to add a simple cookie banner to our website using Google Tag Manager. Then when people allow cookies, we'll fire the tags in our container. And if people don't want to allow cookies, our tags won't fire. I've created a pre-configured template you can import into Google Tag Manager. I've included a link in the description below this video if you'd like to get this. Now let's select Admin. And let's choose Import Container. Let's choose the pre-configured template and select Existing and choose the default workspace. Now I'm going to select Merge and I'm going to import the container. Now let's navigate to Tags. We can see there are two new tags. One called Cookie Consent Consent Mode, and another called Cookie Consent Cookie Banner. Let's open the Cookie Banner tag. This tag is a custom HTML tag that includes Asano's open source cookie banner. This will add the banner to our website. Let's close this. And let's select the Consent Mode tag. This uses a tag template that updates the consent status. Let's close this. And let's navigate to Variables. We can see there are two new user-defined variables, one called Consent Status and one called Cookie Consent Status. When someone makes a selection on the cookie banner, this will log a cookie with a value of either deny or allow based on their selection. The cookie consent status variable gets this value. Then the cookie status takes this value and outputs either denied or granted, which is compatible with the consent status feature. Now we need to modify our tracking tags so that they only fire when people have opted in to use cookies. To do this, let's navigate to Tags. Let's select our GA4 configuration tag. Let's select Tag Configuration to edit the tag. And under Advanced Settings, let's choose Consent Settings. Now let's choose Require additional consent for tag to fire. And let's enter analytics_storage. This will mean that people need to have agreed to analytics cookies before our GA4 tag will fire. Now let's save the tag. And you can repeat this for any other tags that require user consent. I'm going to leave this to you. The final thing we need to do is add some extra code before our Google Tag Manager container on our website. We need to add this extra code to establish the default values for our users. So let's head to my blog to get the code. Let's copy the code. And now let's head to my website. Since I'm using Squarespace, I'm going to use the same code injection option we used to add the Google Tag Manager container. I can see the container code, so we just need to paste the extra code before this. And click Save. Now let's head back to Google Tag Manager. Let's preview our container to see how this impacts the GA4 tag. Let's select Preview. Our website loads, and we can see the cookie banner pops up on the website. Let's head to Tag Assistant. And we can see that our GA4 tag hasn't fired. Now let's head back to the website. Choose the option to allow cookies. And navigate to another page. Now let's head back to Tag Assistant. We can now see the GA4 tag has fired. We're now using consent mode to control when our GA4 tag fires on our website, and we're using the cookie banner to control this. Great work! You've completed my Google Tag Manager tutorial. You've learnt important concepts and walked through how to configure a range of different tags on your website. Don't forget, I've included lots of resources in the description below this video. And if you're looking to learn Google Tag Manager by following a structured curriculum, then take a moment to check out my Google Tag Manager course. In the course, you'll learn even more best practice techniques for setting up and managing your tags. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing for more videos about getting the most out of Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics, and more. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.